Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Power to Change, podcast production of Warriors Heart USA and Power to Change LLC. Today I'm excited to talk about this podcast because we're going to be talking about the spirit of learning and humility. But before we put on our shoes and start this journey today, let me kind of review what we talked about last week. Losing everything hurts. I think we'd all agree with that. Losing everything hurts. In fact, after we lose something, sometimes we are emotionally conditioned to never try again. Well, we started the entire podcast out with a question that the late Dr. Robert Schuller had asked. It was this: what would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? Think about that. I can tell you that I have smashed my thumb with a hammer, I don't know how many occasions. And I'm very hesitant, even to this day, that when I'm holding a nail with my index finger and my thumb, I'm always concerned I'm going to smash one of the two when I have a hammer. I'm mentally conditioned for the pain. There are traps that we talked about. I'd suggest go back and listen to the podcast. But the one thing that these traps do is they make us prisoners. Prisoners to our movement forward. In other words, we hide in a hole. When we lose everything, we've got two options. We have two choices on how to react and respond. The first option is, and you may want to write this down, is we respond immediately with the right tools, the right attitude, and we experience a learning opportunity. This is where training comes in for first responders and for veterans. We're constantly in a training mode. We're constantly looking for errors that we make so we can improve on them so we won't do it again. In fact, there's an old joke that's out there about a guy who kept walking down the street and every day he would fall in a hole. Then one morning he got up and he says, I'm going to take a different path today. I'm not following in any more holes. So when it came time to turn down that road he had been going down for 3 days previously, he went one block farther down and turned left, and he didn't fall in the hole. He responded immediately with the right tools and the right attitude. Number two, the second way we can respond is we respond ineffectively, or we don't respond at all. This kind of attitude will place us in a constant cycle of failure. It's like we are constantly circling the drain. Now, one thing I mentioned in the podcast is that there are 11 keys that I'm going to address over the period of time as we're producing these episodes so that we can understand that our challenges may have pain involved to them, but if we establish a winning attitude with a sometimes we win and sometimes we learn attitude, we can overcome those challenges. I know. I'd been down that road. I was stuck in a hole, and I had to learn the hard way, but I learned. So why don't we basically get ready to jump into today's subject, and let's talk about humility, the spirit of learning. Now, if I start off with this observation that everyone can be knocked down at a time or another in our life. But have you ever noticed that there are some people that will get knocked down, but they rebound almost immediately? Excuse me, coming home, coming out looking better than they did before they fell. But then there are people that get knocked down and never recover. What's the difference between these two groups? It's mindset, it's attitude. People with the spirit of learning have the ability to establish a winning outcome. In fact, it's been established that those that profit from adversity possess a spirit of humility. They are more inclined to make the challenges necessary to learn from their mistakes and their failures. There's a stark contrast to be prideful, people who are unwilling to allow the adversity to be their teacher and result. And as a result, they fail to learn. Write this down. Pride is concerned about who is right. Humility is concerned about what is right. Think about that for a minute. Pride is concerned about who. Humility is concerned about what. As I said before, let's be honest, everybody's going to face adversity in their life. So humble themselves. So some people will humble themselves and they'll rebound, while others will become hard-hearted and will get stuck in the ditch. You know, people who refuse to learn from adversity in life and want to lay in a ditch with their hand out all the time, I actually refer to them as professional victims. They're always looking for somebody to blame. How do I know that? I was one of them once. There is a negative impact for prideful people. Like I said, I should know. I was one of them once. My pride kept me in a proverbial hole of life. Again, get your paper and pencil because I want you to write this down because these are characteristics of a prideful person. A prideful person will blame everybody but themselves. Man, I know about this one. Rather than accept responsibility, I blamed other people. I believed that my miserable life was not my fault at all. Number 2 is denial. I didn't face reality. I wasn't objective or realistic. I would rationalize my bad behavior rather than see what everybody else was seeing. Closed-minded. Number 3. A closed mind is like a closed parachute. If you jump from a plane and do not deploy your chute, it's going to cause a premature death. The same applies with your closed mind in life. It tends to shut everyone else out, thinking they are the ones that are wrong. Number 4, rigidity. When you refuse to be flexible, you tend to have the "it's my way or the highway" attitude. Or this one I love. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I see this a lot of times with politicians. If you don't like what I'm doing and you don't want to play with me, I'm going to take my ball and I'm going home. Rigidity is a big sign of immaturity that allows their past to haunt them and hold them as prisoners. Number 5 is insecurity. People that allow their pride to run their life tend to be very insecure. They attack others in order to make themselves seem better than anyone else. They often act superior. They act like they're better than everybody else. The tragic thing is, if they're in a leadership position, they will ruin the morale. Number 6, and this is one that will kill you. Isolation. Prideful people tend to think that the world revolves around them, and if they don't get the attention that they need, they will distance themselves. They refuse to engage with others. This could be a sign that someone has secrets they don't want coming out. I frankly see this kind of behavior with people who are dealing with soul wounds a lot. People tend to build walls of guilt and shame that will isolate them from the outside world, thinking that they are protecting themselves from the outside world, when in fact they just made themselves a prisoner to the wall of guilt and shame that they've built. They allow their pride to take over, and as a result, they will pay a heavy price. Remember this, it's the finish that counts, not the start that counts the most. The good become the very best because of their humility. People with a lot of talent perform at a high level, but let's be honest, the greatest, the absolute best, achieve the highest levels because they possess the spirit of learning. Now, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn is actually a book written by John Maxwell. I love the book so much that I wanted to actually make it a course to offer in a podcast. We also offer this in a workshop setting. We do this in a day. We also do this for training for companies as well. But anyhow, in John Maxwell's book, he tells a story about his mentor, basketball coach and legend John Wooden. Now, Coach Wooden, when he was a kid growing up, he too was a basketball player on his high school basketball team. On a particular day, particular game day, he had forgotten his uniform at home, and he frankly didn't want to run home and get it. He thought since he was the best player on the team, his coach would not bench him because he didn't have his uniform. Coach Wooden found out differently that day. He found out he was wrong. He found out he wasn't going to be allowed to play in the game without his uniform. So Coach Wooden actually encouraged another bench warmer to run home and get his uniform for him. Now, Wooden tells the story. He tried to reason with the coach to let him into the game. After all, he was the key to winning the game. But his coach told 14-year-old John Wooden that day, there are some things more important in life than winning. That day, John Wooden learned a life lesson. He had a spirit of learning. So how do you think these lessons can affect you today? Think about it. How do you think these lessons can affect you today? How the right spirit helps you learn. Humility will open the doors to learning and to higher levels of achievement. Number one, humility allows us to possess a true perspective of ourselves and life. Humility is not thinking of yourself less. It is thinking less. Let me back up and say that again. Humility is not thinking of yourself less. It is about thinking of yourself less. This is from C.S. Lewis. It is said when we focus on ourselves too much, we can lose perspective. Humility will allow us to gain perspective and see the big picture. It makes us realize that while we may be in the picture, we are not the entire picture. Humility in itself will open our eyes and broadens our view. Simply put, we're not focusing on ourselves. Baseball great Lou Brock once said, show me a guy who's afraid to look bad, and I'll show you a guy that can be beat every time. When you're only focused on yourself, you're not seeing what else is going on around you. Humility fosters an agenda of seeing things as they really are, where pride fosters closed-mindedness. Remember, if your mind is like a parachute, when it's open, you float freely and safely. You're able to see the bigger picture. But when you have a closed mind, you're self-centered, self-serving, and you will crash and burn. Number two, humility enables us to learn and grow in the face of losses. Success lies not in eliminating our trouble and mistakes, but in growing through them. When people have a clear and realistic view of themselves, their vision is usually clear and realistic when they face mistakes or their failures or any other loss. They are set to learn and grow. So tell me, how do you think a humble person will learn from their mistakes, their losses, or their failures? Again, write this down. 1, pause and reflect. Earlier this year, I wrote 3 things that I needed to follow in my life in order to be successful. Number 1 was always seek God first. Number 2 was listen more and talk less. And number 3, don't be in a hurry. This is what pause and reflect will do. We must evaluate our experiences and learn from them. Number 2, admit when you're wrong. Let me tell you a story about this. Several years ago in our neighborhood, or up the road from us, it was late at night. There was a big boom, and I felt it in our house. And I thought my kids were upstairs in their room jumping off their bunk beds onto the floor. I immediately ran up there and I scolded them. And about that time, I got a call that there was a house around the corner from us that had just blown up. And that was the sound that I heard. It wasn't my children. I was called to come and help direct traffic. So before I left, I went up and I told my kids I was wrong. I apologized and I asked them to forgive me. Wise, humble people are never afraid to admit that they were wrong. When they do it, like saying they are wiser today than they were yesterday. Number 3, learn from mistakes. Mark Twain once told people, always acknowledge a fault, frankly and quickly. This will throw the authorities off their guard and give you an opportunity to commit some more. Because you see, mistakes can often be our best teachers. If we take the time to reflect on the mistakes and ask these questions: what went wrong? When did it go wrong? Where did it go wrong? Why did it go wrong? How did I contribute to making it go wrong? What can I learn from this experience? How will I apply what I learned in the future? Ask yourself those questions because, again, mistakes can often be our best teachers if we just take the time to reflect on the mistakes and ask those questions. Number 3, humility allows us to let go of perfection and keep trying. Now, I got to share with you in the book, Sometimes You Win and Sometimes You Learn, there's a section in there where John Maxwell talks about his son and daughter-in-law and his grandson. Well, apparently his son and daughter-in-law bought his grandson a book. It's called Mistakes That Worked, and it's by Charlotte Foltz Jones. Now, Charlotte says you can call them accidents, you can call them mistakes, even serendipity. But these were accidents, mistakes that actually worked. As an example, there's pharmacist John Pemberton of Atlanta, Georgia. In 1886, he had made many inventions, something called French wine coca. It was ideal for nerve tonic. He made the perfect new medicine to relieve exhaustion, aid in nervousness, and soothe headaches. He was happy with his invention. It was syrup, and chilled water. Well, he left it out one evening, and his assistant accidentally mixed soda water with it, and the drink was transformed. Today, in the 21st century, that concoction is known as, yeah, you guessed it, it's Coca-Cola. So let me ask you this. How many other inventions were created as a result of their mistakes? Think about it. I don't have enough time on this podcast to basically share all of them with you. But number 4 here is humility allows us to make the most out of our mistakes. Again, Mark Twain was once asked to name the greatest of all inventions. His reply: accidents. As I just said, I could spend 3 or 4 podcasts naming all these inventions that were the result of accidents. We're going to make mistakes in our life. And most of them, if not all of them, we have the opportunity to learn from. So if you bring the right spirit to your work, you can turn a mistake into an opportunity. The life of every man is a diary in which he means to write one story and ends up writing another. And in his humblest hour, when he compares the volumes as it is with what he vowed to make it. In other words, we all intended to live a particular life. We all had intended goals, dreams, visions we wanted to happen. And somewhere in the process, it took a left turn, it took a right turn, but it wasn't exactly what we were heading to do, but it turned out great. We're all going to fall short. There's no question about it. But when we evaluate what we've done and we compare it to what we have accomplished instead, if we're humble and we're open to lessons in life, life lessons that will teach us, I promise you our odds of success will increase. Knowing that we have tried our best, then we might be content with the outcome. Folks, this is Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn. The podcast is Power to Change, and I am Bob Bauer.